Welcome to Work You Love, real stories of career change and fulfillment. This is the show where we share real stories of people who once felt stuck in their careers, made a change, and found work that lights them up. I'm your host, Danielle. I've worn a lot of hats in my own career, and my mission here is simple: to help you find work that you love. Each week, you'll hear inspiring stories and practical tools to stop feeling stuck and start building a career that truly fits you. So let's dive in. Welcome, Jerome. I'm so excited to have you on Work You Love. You've done so many interesting things in your career, so I'm excited to dive in and hear more about your story. So, the first thing that I always love to start with is, what are you doing now and what do you love most about it?
So what am I doing now and what do I love most about it? I have been through a lot over the years, many pivots, finding my way through entrepreneurship after exiting corporate. And what I do now is I help founders find what they're going to do post exit. I think many people have this idea that they're going to go and be an entrepreneur and figure out all the problems of the world and get really rich. And then when they get to the end, they just kind of ride off into the sunset. And unfortunately, for most people, that is not the case. And when they get to that liquidity event that everybody dreams of, they find something that they didn't expect. They find something we call the exit paradox. And in finding that paradox, they find disappointment, grief, sadness, and pain. And it's hard to believe that you do all this work in order to have that end. And so we've committed to eradicating the experience of the founder's exit paradox. And what we enjoy most about it is seeing the light come back on. Many times founders don't believe us and they just say, oh, well, I have enough money, I'll figure it out. And they don't. And sometimes it takes years for them to get to a place where they're willing to get some help. And when they finally get that help and the light comes back on and they're smiling again and they feel like themselves again, it's one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had.
Yeah, it's so interesting to think that when I think about an exit and making all this money, we have this big vision of like all of our problems are going to be solved. So it's such an interesting niche to focus on that you found that actually when you exit, there's all of this grief that comes with it because you've been working toward that goal forever. How did you actually get into this or even realize that this was a problem for founders who were making an exit?
Yeah, I've had a few exits myself, but my first exit was from corporate. And so I had the opportunity to build a division from $0 in revenue. On January 13th, we started with two people on our team, and we moved to about 175 people on my team by the end of September of that year. End of year, we had about $20 million in revenue and 30% profit margins, and everything was great. But I got a phone call on December 24th at 4:55, and it went something like this: "Hey, Jerome, we're going to lay half the team off." And this is a person that I saw once a quarter and talked to every other week. We were going to lay half the team off. It's like, that's not the right answer. These people have not moved to new duty stations with their husbands, decided that they weren't going to move forward into new opportunities because this was something that was really exciting for them, and so on and so on and so on. And so I understood the sacrifices people were making in order for us to do something that had never been done before. We were taking overhead power lines and putting them underground in southeastern Virginia. Uh, and in my defiance, the caller got frustrated. He said, "Hey, man, look, I didn't call to debate or negotiate with you. I called to inform you of a decision." And so I kept going, and he hung up on me and said he's going to go spend the rest of the year with his family. And so while he was with his family, I was in my basement figuring out how to decide who's going to stay and who's going to go. Because, 75, 85 people is really difficult to pick who's going to stay and who's going to go. And while we did have some folks that weren't big contributors, the vast majority of the team was pretty good. Anyway, so we get through that. We put Humpty Dumpty back together again. We make another run. And at the end of the next year, I'm having a similar conversation. And I just decided that it was too much for us to have such financial success. And around the holidays, people are still trying to figure out how they're going to pay. for food and presents and so on and so forth. And so I decided to exit corporate. And in exiting corporate, I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just wanted out. And so when I got out, I was floating in this sea of nothingness. It's kind of like the best way I can describe it is a shipwreck. So you don't know how to get back to where you were. You're kind of floating in the ocean, holding on to whatever wreckage is floating so that you don't drown and you don't overextend yourself trying to swim on your own. And that's what most founders find on the backside of their exit. And so I'm going through that and I'm just like, well, nobody's calling me anymore. There's silence. Many of the people I spent most of my time with were gone. The work that I was doing, I was no longer doing it. My health had suffered because I was working so many hours and not sleeping very much. From a prosperity standpoint, it wasn't a liquidity event for me personally. So I wasn't work optional at that point. And while I had time and talent, I didn't really have a problem to apply it against. And then finally, like significance, I didn't really feel like my life mattered anymore because I wasn't helping anybody. And so, like, as I moved through what we call the centers of doubt that I just laid out for you, I realized that this was a problem and there really wasn't any resource to help me move through that. The point where it got really clear that this was a problem was me sitting in the back of a business conference in Carlsbad, California. A guy had just exited for 2 billion, and he was given a 7-step program on how to have a double unicorn exit. And while I thought the title of the presentation was pretty precocious, I was like, well, let's see what's going on. And none of the steps were interesting to me, Danielle. The only thing that was interesting to me was he said, I was drinking and thinking. I told my wife that I was going to go get a burger for In-N-Out, and she told me to pick up a job application. I asked her why I should get a job application, and she said, because you're sad panda. I can tell when you've been stimulated and when you haven't, and right now you're not being stimulated at all. And after he said that, he said, I was having an existential crisis. I'd never heard the term before. I didn't know what it was. And I wanted to find out more. And so when he got done with his presentation, I got a hold of the mic and I said, are you ready? He said, that's an interesting way to set up a question. I said, well, I'm really going to take you there. And he's like, okay, go ahead, shoot. I said, how'd you get out of your crisis? And he looked at me and he said, I'll let you know when I do. It was in that moment I knew that this was a epidemic that nobody was paying attention to because a guy with that much money seemingly would be able to get the support he needed in order to not be sitting in a crisis after having such a huge exit. So I went and did research, and the only thing that I found in my research was a Harvard Business Review article that said, congratulations, you sold your business, now prepare to be depressed. And this takes us back to the beginning of this conversation of you do all this work, you make all these sacrifices, you miss the games, you miss the family events, you insert the thing, all to put it into the business that you want to sell one day for a 8, 9, 10-figure exit, only to find out that the only thing that's waiting for you is depression. I felt like there was something wrong with that.
How did you yourself, because you were in this depressed state too when you were having this conversation with someone, how did you get yourself out of it? Was it just by doing the research so that you could apply it to help other people?
So my experience happened prior to experiencing this one, and so I was already out. I went back and found a childhood dream, or I guess it was more of a college dream than a childhood dream, and started buying real estate, specifically apartment businesses. My dream was to be in private equity prior to going into engineering. I went down that path. It was very difficult to get in, got turned down by over 10 banks, and eventually found partners so that we could get into the space. But I'd gone down that path. I thought that was the answer. I found out that it wasn't because it was pretty lonely. The only time people wanted to talk to me was to ask me if they were going to get a dividend check or to complain about their apartment, which none of those things were really exciting for me. So then I moved back to, well, what was the thing that I enjoyed most when I was building the big company. And what I found was the only thing that mattered was people coming into my office and saying, "Hey, I couldn't have done that without you." And so at this juncture, I was helping people with what we call the first four exits of a founder. Those are leaving corporate America, becoming CEO 1.0, becoming a thought leader or product manager, and then finally becoming CEO 2.0. And all of these things are, we can talk about them in more detail, but the point was it was about building and scaling business. In this instance, where we're listening to a guy tell us about his big exit, I realized that the back half, the other four exits of a founder, were more important. Because what happened, no matter how much more money we help the founders make in the first half, it was never enough. And so we were on this treadmill of trying to figure out how to do more. That wasn't my game. And if people weren't going to be happy with whatever the more was when they got to the more, I felt like I was in a space in a place where I couldn't actually fulfill the mission. And so this gave me the awareness that the back half of the 8 exits of a founder were the ones that we could have real impact, and it was actually something that we could use, to make a real impact on the world, because accumulation is one thing, but investing what was accumulated is something very different, and something that I believe has a deeper impact for society at large.
Actually, I would love to hear more about some of these steps because I know even when someone's changing careers, you can have your identity tied to work. And I would imagine one of the reasons why when you make a big exit, you end up feeling really unfulfilled is because so much of you is in what you're doing. Is part of the process kind of letting go of that or understanding that there are so many different things to do in life, and so even if, you spent your time doing this thing and building this company, there is more to be done in the world? Or yeah, if you could just elaborate a little bit more on some of those steps.
The first 4 exits of a founder are ones that everybody goes through. Your point of, hey, if I change jobs or if I change companies or if I change careers, uh, is this the same process? The answer is yes, right? Any big pivot is going to have a big impact if your identity is wrapped up in what you do. The point that I like to make in these situations, though, is we're human beings. We're not human doings. And so America is the only place that I know of where we lead with what we do. And it's funny because it's like, well, how do you make a living? Well, making money and making a living are not the same thing. And I think it's extremely, extremely, extremely important for people to recognize that, because there's so much more to you than what you sell your time for. Once you're able, and this is the essence of the exit paradox, once you're able to unravel or decouple your identity from what you do to earn money, there's a level of freedom that exists that allows you to apply your resources, your time, talent, and treasures to any problem that you decide that you want to work on. In addition to that, you can decide which problems that you get paid to work on and which ones that you work on for free. Because I find so many people struggling with being generous, right? And like that is not something that most people get exposed to, because we're sold on this American dream from basically the point that we can walk. But I remember specifically being in the front yard with my mom and telling her at the age of 5 that I wanted to be a trash man, and her telling me, you got to dream bigger than that, because that won't pay for Jordache jeans and a Nike t-shirt and Nike shoes for the kids that you might have one day if that's what you want. I felt like all of the innocence got sucked out of it, because it was like, oh, I thought it was supposed to be fun. And Lonnie looked like he was having so much fun on the back of the trash truck. And, he did it at like art. He would flip the lid off. It would spin around like a quarter and then eventually fall flat. He'd do a little pirouette, dump the trash in, and then like spin it back to the curb instead of walking it back to the curb. And it was just like, man, if I could do that all day, it seems like that would be cool. And he got home early enough that when the kids got home, he could play with the kids. And it was just like, my dad gets home after dark when daylight savings time goes away. And so, playing catch or some of the other things I wanted to do were only on the weekend if we got to do them on the weekend. And I learned a lot in that moment about how we get programmed. Especially and more women are independent these days and highly educated and very capable. But I think programming for boys to be providers is something that is pretty intense. And I see the paradox hit them harder because there's a lack of focus on relationship and community for most men. It's really, really interesting to see how the dynamics change based on gender. But I'm saying a whole lot of words. And the thing that you really wanted to know about was the steps of exiting. And so I think most people are employees. That's how they learn how to work. That's how they learn skills. And so that first exit is leaving being an employee. We usually tie to corporate America. Once you do that, you become CEO 1.0. We call that Chief Everything Officer. It is not what you see on Instagram or TikTok. There are no private jets. There's no Ferraris or Lamborghinis or anything else that ends in I. You go to the paper store and get paper for the printer. You take out the trash. You answer the phones. You try to find leads. You try to find people who are going to buy. You try to find people who are going to help you sell it. And you need somebody to help you bill it, but you're probably going to do it yourself in the beginning. You're probably going to mess up your taxes. Like you do everything yourself in the beginning. And most people just try to skip that part because they're used to the structure of corporate and it just doesn't exist. Nothing glamorous about it. And then eventually you figure out something, a problem, and some people, and somebody decides to give you money. And that's when you're actually in business, right? When you move from that to becoming a product manager or a thought leader, this is a space where people are doing things for you, but you have to tell them exactly what to do. And so while things can get done while you're multiplying your time, you still are involved to make sure that everything happens. And this is what most people will call a frontline supervisor if you're thinking about it from the corporate arena. From there, you're usually able to move up to a new level that allows you to have somebody that is more responsible for the day-to-day. So I'm kind of a manager of the supervisors. This is where things start to get magical for the founder because things are happening without them instructing them to happen. That is when you actually have a business. What really popped my bubble when we thought we were doing really hot stuff in our company was when we had a mentor say, the more valuable you are to your business, the less valuable your business is. I said, uh-oh. Around me, it's centered around me, it's built around me. And this kind of goes back to what you were talking about as it related to self-image. If you have a business, the goal is for it to be an asset independently operating for you. And, it's supposed to send you money whether you show up or not. And I just don't think most people get there. One of the uh, points that I like to pull in from Robert Kiyosaki is the cash flow quadrant. In this cash flow quadrant, he talks about being an employee, being self-employed, being a business owner, or being an investor. And it's on this 2x2 matrix. And what we find is most people try to go from being an employee to being an investor. And they try to skip over the other two. The way to create real wealth is on what we call the right side, which is investing and being a business owner. It's my belief that the highest return on investment that you can get is from being a business owner. Not being self-employed, but being a business owner. And then you take that money that you created by being a business owner and invest it. And I watch so many people continue to invest, hoping that they're going to get free one day, but they are getting minimal returns because somebody else is doing the work of operating the business that they're investing in. So the last place that I'll go on those steps is when you become CEO. And so being a true CEO means you're not focused on the day-to-day. You've got other people that are focused on the day-to-day, and you're being strategic about the organization and what it should be focusing on. And so you're not focusing on problems this week. You're focused on what you expect problems to be next year or the year after.
What you were saying about outsourcing and acting at a higher level just reminded me of a book that I read recently. It's called 10 Times is Better Than 2 Times. I don't know if you've heard of
Next is
it,
better
but
than 2x. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, it blew my mind because I realized I mean, I think it is important to do everything initially just so you know how things work, and then in order to reach that next level, you really do have to, like, pull other people in and get help so that you can use what you're good at to grow your business. I really loved your story about when you were a kid and how much you looked up to the trash man, and you just saw that and you were like, "Well, he's having a great time." Also, I love that he had a great time in that job. But for someone who is interested in kind of unraveling this idea that, we have to, like, hustle and grind and, like, work isn't that fun, how can someone get back to doing work for fun? Because that's something that I am really passionate about is I speak to so many people that just, like, stay in corporate or who are just really unhappy in their careers, but they just accept it because 'cause they're like, "Well, this is how it's supposed to be," and also have kind of the golden handcuffs where they're making so much money and they don't like their job, but, like, it's feeding into the lifestyle that they want. How can someone start to unravel that and explore doing something that they actually love that they can also get paid for?
Yeah, so we created a model for work and it's not focused on fun. So hopefully you'll give me a little bit of leeway and we can dig into this. But we call it the 4 eyes for fulfilled work. Because I think that's what most people are seeking, even if they don't use that vernacular to describe what they're trying to achieve. The first one is interest. Income is, of course, an important one. Influence, impact are the 4 eyes that we dig into. And each one of those kind of taps into what uh, the Chinese call ikigai. Ikigai is connected to what does the world need? What do you like to do? What can you get paid for? And ours is a modification of that. But in the end, I think we get to a very similar place. And so if you can find work that satisfies the 4 eyes, you find fulfillment. If not, then you end up in one of the suboptimal states. And the question is, can you get that in the work that you're doing by making an adjustment in the schedule or in the project type or the people that you're working with? Or if not, then where is the confluence so that you can get to that space?
It's actually really similar to a lot of content that I put out there. Like when someone's thinking about changing careers or maybe starting like their own business or side hustle, well, what are you constantly talking about? What are you researching about? What are people coming to you advice for or that you love helping them with? And going back to the point of people being too generous, and I've experienced this myself too, where it's like, well, I shouldn't ask money for that because I just enjoy doing it. And getting out of the mindset that charging money for something that you love to do and that you can help people with is a bad thing was a big one for me. But if I'm offering value to someone and it's more than what I'm charging them, then we're both benefiting from it. I love how you've summarized this with interest, influence, impact, and income because it kind of covers everything that you would need to find fulfillment in your work. You've had a ton of different careers and you've pivoted a few times. I'm also someone that has pivoted a bunch of times. So there was like always an inner conflict for me because there's this idea that, you really need to like stick to one thing, see it through, have it be successful before you should move on to something else. How do you know when it is time to pivot into something else?
So I will go back to the 4 eyes, right? If you know that you can't find inspired work in what you're doing, then you should pivot because you're going to be continuously dissatisfied. Many people sit in that space of being dissatisfied because income is far greater than what they think they can get anywhere else. But what we found is the income that you're using to justify you staying in that suffering isn't necessary when you move into work that you enjoy doing because you're not trying to buy the trinkets and the toys to make you feel better about doing work that you're not passionate about. Um, so that's where my general answer would be. But we go to level 6, which is significance. If you ask the question, does my life really matter? And the answer is no, then what are you spending your time on? Like at the end of the day, I'm of the opinion that we're only here to serve others and to make a significant impact on other people's lives. And if you don't feel like you're getting that from the way that you're living your life as a whole, not just your work, then you're probably in a situation where you're doing things that are detrimental to your health. You probably aren't very prosperous, even if you have money. And your satisfaction with life is gonna be fairly low. And so I'm not quite sure what the purpose of living a life in that manner would be, other than maybe trying to keep up an appearance for people who you're trying to impress. And eventually that becomes exhausting and you feel lost in that in and of itself. So I would encourage people to use those 2 things to kinda guide their, decision.
Yeah, and a lot of my conversations actually with people on this podcast, it's so hard to let go of that ego that's attached to your role. But when you think about and I tell people this all the time too, like, think about your 80 or 90-year-old self looking back at your life. Are you going to regret staying in this position or doing something that you don't really feel fulfilled in? And if the answer is yes, hopefully it creates enough pain for them to actually take some kind of action. Building off of that and taking action, you were able to take so many different almost leaps of faith in your career, of just leaving something that wasn't working for you behind and starting something new. For someone who might not be in the position to do it or they're still too scared to, but they have this kind of inner voice telling them that they want more, what do you think the first step for them should be to be able to then take that leap and start your own business or just do something that they love more?
Yeah, at base, I think that most people probably shouldn't be entrepreneurs. It's really difficult. You have inconsistent cash flow in the beginning for sure, and you spend a lot of time really finding out who you are with the stresses that show up and the inconsistencies or instability that you experience along that journey. So, for most people, I don't think the answer is entrepreneurship. But what I would say is that you can find a way to do these things that will make your heart do flips when you get the opportunity to do them. Sometimes it's not even in a paid manner. Now, if I was talking to my daughters who are getting to the place where they're figuring out like where they want to invest their time and how they want to make money, I would tell them specifically that you want to find a problem that you want to eradicate from the face of the planet and you wanna find a group of people that have that problem that you would enjoy working with. And if you can do those 2 things, you've kinda rigged success because you've got a passion about the problem and you are gonna be working with people that you enjoy.
Yeah, and also just to add to that, I completely agree. That's something that I've been doing and figuring out my way around, but also not getting like so overwhelmed by this idea of like, oh, I have to build an entire business or entire side hustle or like completely change careers. Just kind of like dabble in it and do research, see what you would like. Yeah, that's a really good piece of advice. You mentioned just how being an entrepreneur is really difficult. And I completely agree with that because I think I recorded this video like 2 months ago of myself saying the entrepreneurial journey is the biggest mindset game ever. So just this, if anyone's going through it right now and they're feeling like they can't do it, but they're really passionate about what they're doing, just keep on going because hopefully you're grounded in your purpose. But yeah, it's the biggest mindset game ever. And you have to have so much belief in yourself that you can do it. What are you most looking forward to in this journey? You're building something that's so cool and so unique. Where do you see it going?
Yeah, it's funny that you've asked. We've got the opportunity to share what we've built as it relates to exit planning with other exit planning professionals with the conditionaling body, the largest conditionaling body for exit planning. And so sharing our methodology with other people and truly being a thought leader in the space is what's next because we know for a fact that we can't help all the people that are struggling with these issues. And we know that what we've built, we've published on this content more than anybody else on the face of the planet, doesn't exist anywhere else. And so our ability to help the 75% of people that regret selling their businesses after the first year by helping other people adopt our methodology and then implement it with their clients is something that is extremely exciting for us. And our goal is to take that 75% and cut it in half and keep cutting it in half until it's irrelevant and people actually realize and understand that the liquidity event isn't the finish line. Like you have to go from liquidity to legacy. And if you think that the business that you spent 15 to 50 years building is your legacy, you're in for a rude awakening when you actually get to that day where you no longer turn the lights on and lock up the building that you run your business out of.
Yeah, I was thinking about that when you were telling me about the different stages and like the 4 eyes and the framework. I was like, wow, these are frameworks that are so accessible. And even if you can't work with someone one to one, if you like built something out that can have a wider impact that people have access to, um, I think that's so cool. So many great words of wisdom. I really, really enjoyed this conversation. I personally learned so much as someone who's who's also going through it and really enjoying my day job, but then also really wanting to build something of my own and getting this message out that uh, you can do work that lights you up and that you love. And also just going back to what you're saying, even if you're not doing that in your day job, finding ways to do that outside of work so you can just live a more fulfilled life in general is such an important message.
Fulfillment is the game. It doesn't matter how much money you have. If you can figure out the fulfillment piece, you'll have a rich life.
Yeah, exactly. Once you also ground yourself in all of the things that you do have now and you can see that too. I like this quote that I heard, the more you enjoy life, the more life gives you to enjoy. So continuing to find like those pockets of enjoyment in our lives. And also, where can people find you if they're inspired by this conversation or they want to work for you? Not for you, but with you. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure there are a lot of people who also maybe want to work for you after this conversation.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, right? So if you just want to kind of lurk and hang out, LinkedIn's the place to go. We're there every day. If you are interested in learning more, like on a deep level, there's two ways to do that. You can go to the website exittoexcellence.com and just kind of peruse around. We've got white papers, we've got videos, we got all kind blogs, we got all kinds of stuff that you can read and learn from. And if you just want to listen to more stories or hear stories of founders who have exited and found fulfillment on the backside, then our podcast, Your Next, is the place to go. And that's available on all the major platforms, including YouTube. So, those would be the three places I would tell folks to go. I usually only say one, but for this audience, I think they should have a little bit of variety depending on where they are on the journey.
Great. Thank you so much. This was just such a good conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. And shout out to Maurice for connecting us.
This was one of those conversations that I was just so excited to share with you, especially the reminder that success without fulfillment still feels empty. Here are a few takeaways you can bring into your own life. The first is ask the real question: does what I'm doing matter to me? If the answer is not really, get curious instead of judgmental. What problem would you love to help solve and for who? Let that guide your next small step. Next, money and achievement aren't the finish line. Hitting a big goal or even an exit won't automatically make you happy. Fulfillment comes from how you spend your time and who you impact, not just the number in your bank account. And lastly, you're a human being, not a job title. If your role no longer fits, it's okay to pivot. Use Jerome's lens: interest, income, influence, and impact. If you can't find enough of those where you are, start exploring where you can. If this episode resonated, share it with a friend who needs the reminder, and subscribe so you never miss an episode of Work You Love. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next time.